Every major decision you make in life is a gamble. You never have complete information. You never know the outcome until after you act. Loving someone is a gamble. Trusting someone is a gamble. Even choosing not to act is a gamble. Just one you pretend is safe. Usogui is a manga that understands this better than almost anything I've read. It isn't really about gambling. It's about what it means to live when certainty doesn't exist. And for a long time, it was also a manga I kept hearing about without ever really understanding why people felt that way about it. Truthfully, the praise I'd heard had always been kind of vague. Just a lot of, it's really amazing, or you just gotta read it. But never too much detail about what actually made it so great. People clearly loved it, but I never quite understood why. There was never a clean elevator pitch. Never a neat explanation of what made it so special beyond a general sense that it was intense, smart, and worth your time. I'll admit, I was also a little intimidated. Usogui is a long manga. It had been a while since I'd really sunk my teeth into a story that dense, something that demands attention, patience, and active engagement from the reader. But the artwork kept pulling me in. There was something immediately striking about it, something confident and strange. And when you hear about a series often enough, eventually curiosity wins out. So I finally took the dive. Before I go any further, I want to be clear about what this video is and what it isn't. This is going to be more rambling than my usual content. I'm not zeroing in on a single character or tightly defined theme. I'm still marinating on a lot of things, still kind of processing what this manga means to me and why it left such a strong impression. This is more of a general outlet for my thoughts, a kind of loose, reflective pitch for Usogui rather than a spoiler-heavy breakdown or academic analysis. I'll be avoiding major spoilers and keeping things relatively broad. That said, I might show the occasional panel or page from later in the manga, which could technically count as a minor spoiler, but I won't be dissecting specific twists or outcomes or going into the nitty-gritty of the plot. The goal here is to talk about why this manga is worth reading, not to strip it of its surprises. Usogui, written and illustrated by Toshio Sako, is often described as a psychological thriller manga about gambling. But more accurately, I'd say it's a manga about a man who gambles, Baku Madarame. Baku is a super intelligent, charismatic, and seemingly reckless gambler who survives high-stakes games through sharp wit, elaborate strategies, and an almost unnerving calm in the face of danger. He's nicknamed Usogui, or the Lie Eater, because of his tendency to expose and devour the lies his opponents rely on. Lies they tell themselves about certainty, control, and inevitability. Over the course of the series, Baku's overarching goal is to take control of an incredibly powerful gambling organization known as Kakero. This is done by defeating its leader in a challenge called Surpassing the Leader. It's a challenge that he's attempted once before and failed for reasons that we aren't entirely aware of. So we follow Baku as he climbs the ranks of Kakero, engaging in increasingly dangerous and elaborate gambles against a wide variety of opponents, each with their own philosophies, tricks, and reasons for gambling in the first place. The first thing I really want to talk about is the art. The artistic growth in Usogui is genuinely breathtaking. While the early art has a certain rough charm to it, watching Sako's style evolve into something so detailed, expressive, and confident is incredible. By the later arcs, the artwork is nothing short of stunning. The double-page spreads in particular are a huge highlight. There were moments where I just stopped reading entirely and just stared at the page, taking in the composition, the intensity, and the sheer presence of it all. The art doesn't just look good, it actively elevates the tension. These gambles are life or death, and the artwork makes you feel that weight. It amplifies the psychological pressure, the fear, the confidence, the desperation. It turns abstract mind games into something visceral. Structurally, the plot itself is fairly straightforward, but it serves as a strong backbone for incredibly well thought out mind games. Each arc focuses on a different gamble, and what really impressed me was how distinct each one feels. The series never falls into repetition. I was always excited to see what kind of game would come next. A big reason why this works is that the games themselves are often twisted versions of things we already understand. Labyrinth-style puzzles, battleship, poker, and other familiar concepts. That familiarity makes the rules easier to grasp while allowing the manga to focus on how these rules are bent, exploited, and weaponized. On top of that, There are multiple organizations, ongoing mysteries, and long-term narrative threads constantly moving in the background. All of this does add up to make Usogui a dense read. It demands attention, especially when you're learning the rules of a new game or tracking multiple layers of strategy at once. But if you take your time, it's incredibly rewarding. Even when you logically assume that Baku is going to win because he's the protagonist, the series presents things in such a way that the tension never disappears. I constantly found myself trying to predict what the characters were planning or how they could possibly escape the situation they were in. There's also some excellent long-term foreshadowing sprinkled throughout the manga, especially in the slower first half, but this ends up working because the events pay off much later in ways that feel deliberate and earned. The manga is also very good at constantly raising the stakes. It doesn't just plateau, it keeps getting better. The Labyrinth arc was where I personally got hooked, where I realized the series was doing something really great, but from the Tower of Karma onward, Usogui becomes something truly incredible. The final stretch of arcs is easily one of the best runs of manga I've read in a long time. It's also worth mentioning that Usogui isn't only about psychological warfare. There's a surprising amount of action, and it's all really well done. Within Kakero, there are referees who oversee gambles and act as debt collectors once games conclude. Because of their role, every referee is an extremely skilled combatant. They are ranked, and they can challenge one another in brutal one-on-one battles to claim rank. These fights are fast-paced, violent, and intense, but what I really appreciate is how naturally they're woven into the story. They don't feel like distractions, they serve the narrative, break up the mental games, and deepen the world. On top of that, the referees themselves are quirky, memorable characters, which makes these confrontations even more engaging. Speaking of the characters, Baku Madarame is the undeniable standout. He's an exceptional protagonist. His motivations and true nature are never completely clear, even to the people closest to him, and I loved gradually coming to understand him better as the story progressed. He rides this fascinating line between being admirable and unsettling. His charisma is infectious, but there's always something dangerous simmering beneath the surface. What stood out to me is that Baku seemed to respect people who live honestly, who act true to themselves. You can see this with how he treats his allies and comrades. Philosophically, he's also deeply interesting. The manga explores his belief in the power of personal actions and calculated choice over external forces like fate or destiny. Baku doesn't wait for things to happen. He forces the world to respond to him, and he backs up that belief by repeatedly staking his life on his own gambles. His dynamic with the main antagonist, Soichi, is phenomenal. Their shared history and opposing ideals are built up slowly and carefully, which makes their eventual confrontation feel genuinely climactic. Soichi represents perfectionism, control, and a belief in destiny, while Baku embodies chaos, choice, and absolute commitment to one's own decisions. One seeks to master chaos entirely, the other lives in it without flinching. On the topic of antagonist, I also really loved Vincent Lalo. Much like Soichi, his rivalry with Baku is given room to breathe. The build-up across the arcs he's involved in makes their gamble feel earned and tense. Lalo walks a fascinating line between charm and intimidation, and every scene he's in carries a sense of unpredictability. Another character I'd like to highlight is Kaji. He functions as something like the series' second protagonist, becoming involved after Baku helps him in the very first chapter. Kaji provides an important perspective. He's closer to the audience than anyone else. He doesn't fully understand Baku at first, and watching him slowly figure Baku out, grow closer to him, and yet still carve out his own identity is incredibly satisfying. Kaji gets his own gambles, and what's interesting is how different they feel from Baku's. His arc is largely about learning not to rely on Baku, to stand on his own 2 feet, find his confidence, and take responsibility for his decisions. Watching Kaji grow stronger and more self-assured over time was one of the most rewarding parts of the manga for me. Thematically, Usogui really resonated with me. Without spoiling specific events, I think the core theme of the series is an exploration of fate versus free will. It argues that while life is filled with chance, uncertainty, and a lot of suffering, meaning is ultimately created by embracing risk, by making those deliberate, subjective choices in the face of chaos. The lies Baku devours are often his opponent's beliefs that victory is guaranteed, that outcomes are fixed, or that they're protected by destiny. Gambling becomes a metaphor for the human experience itself. Life is a gamble where the ending is known, but the path isn't. And because the end is fixed, every decision along the way becomes heavier, sharper, and more meaningful. You never have complete information, you never control the variables, and you never know the outcome until after you act. That's true of every major human decision. Even choosing not to act is a wager, a bet that the future will be kind without your involvement. In that sense, all humans are gamblers. Most just refuse to admit it. They hide behind routines, ideologies, or beliefs in destiny to pretend the stakes are lower than they really are. Baku rejects that. His actions are a denunciation of fate. He's condemned to freedom, and he accepts it fully. His losses are his to bear, but so are his victories. What Usogui ultimately suggests is that refusing to gamble is itself a gamble, one that bets your life on safety, predictability, and inertia. That's why the choices you make matter more than the outcomes. Meaning doesn't come from some magical force like fate. It comes from choosing despite it. Even if destiny exists, a life without choice is indistinguishable from death. Overall, Usogui is a manga I can't recommend enough. It's entertaining, thoughtful, visually stunning, and surprisingly profound. It's a long read, and the first half is a lot of setup, and the payoff doesn't really come in until the later parts of the manga. It does ask a lot of its reader, but if you're willing to give it your time and attention, and maybe take a gamble, then I genuinely think it's something special. It's already cemented itself as one of my favorites, and the more I think about it, the more it stays with me. Every major decision in life is a gamble. You never have complete information, and you never know the outcome until after you act. Usogui doesn't try to make that comforting. It just asks you to look at it honestly, and if nothing else, reading it reminded me that meaning doesn't come from certainty. It comes from choosing anyway. If that idea resonates with you at all, I think Usogui might too.